Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting live on July 2nd from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Later on in the show, we're going to take a look at American democracy from a different angle. We'll bring on a professor of law from Stetson University College of Law in Gulfport to talk about yesterday's historic ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court granting presidents immunity for all official actions. We'll find out what that means and what to expect, and we'll open up the phone lines as well so that you can weigh in on what you think about that ruling yesterday. But first, we'll look at American democracy here in Florida. Our first guest is former State Representative Jennifer Webb. She represented parts of South Pinellas in the state legislature, and we're going to talk to her about a new group called the Sunshine State Unity Network. It aims to reduce violence, bolster the republic, and restore faith in our democratic institutions in Florida. So welcome to Tuesday Cafe, Jennifer.
Thanks, Ian. It's good to be here with you.
I'm so glad you could join us. And so tell us, what is the Sunshine State Unity Network?
So the Sunshine State Unity Network 100 is an idea that former Representative Kurt Kelly, community leader from Miami, Lisa Lorenzo, who are both Republicans, and I came up with and gained support from the Carter Center. And it's a cross-partisan network aimed at reinstilling those civic engagement practices that are so important to just participating in civil life and civic life in the United States, and then also restoring faith in our democratic institutions, including our elections. And so we have candidate principals, we do monthly webinars, and we have on a host of experts who help educate a cross-partisan group of individuals on a whole host of topics.
And we'll talk more about that as this segment goes on. But let's first talk about your affiliation with the Carter Center. How are you affiliated with the Carter Center, and remind people what that is?
The Carter Center is President Jimmy Carter's, instead of doing a presidential library, he did an institute or a center in order to help spread the understanding of democracy and a value of democracy, and to help uphold free, fair, safe, and secure elections throughout the world. And so they have long worked in countries other than the United States, but with the decrease of America's standing on the democratic, for our democratic ranking, basically, they started to turn their attention to the United States. And then with the growing hyperpartisanship and partisan violence, culminating, I think many of us would agree, with January 6th, 4 years ago, they said, we definitely have to turn our focus to the U.S. And so they launched pilot programs in 5 states across the United States: Florida, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, and New Mexico. And that's where we first began working with, in a bipartisan fashion, one Democrat, one Republican, just like President Carter worked with the James Baker Institute, a former Republican Secretary of State, to bring attention to our election processes.
What can you tell us then about the democratic ranking of the U.S. and what factors are contributing to the fact that it's declining?
Many of the factors are faith in our democratic processes and in our institutions. So likelihood to vote, likelihood to think that violence is the answer if your candidate isn't elected to office. You were talking about the Supreme Court, not trusting the rulings coming from the highest courts. All of these things factor into our democratic ranking. And it's done by a nonpartisan, disinterested group that doesn't wish to bolster or downgrade anyone. And they do it for all of the countries across the world.
So you mentioned that there are similar groups in other states. Is this what's called the Democracy Resilience Project? And so I assume that the Sunshine State Unity Network is one of those, and the other states are doing similar work?
They are. And it's really wonderful. So we all are bringing together people across the partisan divide from different walks of life. We all have, former elected officials and neighborhood block captains from, neighborhood associations who aren't engaged in politics, but are engaged in civic life. We all seek to get out messages that restore norms to like a positive norming around elections, around democratic processes, around getting engaged and learning how to disagree without being disagreeable.
And you mentioned two of your maybe co-partners in this effort in the Sunshine State Unity Network. These are names that I'm not that familiar with, so maybe you could tell us more about Republican Kurt Kelly from Ocala and Miami community leader Lisa Lorenzo, also a Republican who is from Miami. Tell us more about your partners in this.
Sure. So Kurt Kelly was a representative. His tenure was prior to mine. He's a Republican from Ocala. He was actually, prior to his tenure in the state house, he was appointed to the school board by Governor Bush at the time, and sat on the school board in Ocala. And then he ran for public office. When he was there, he was known. He is absolutely a conservative. He is firmly centered in the middle of his party and their platform. Yet he also found ways of working on issues that cross the partisan divide in order to just bring about a better state for all of Florida. And so he worked on a lot of bills that touched children in the state of Florida, that touched the opioid epidemic. He actually was one of the first people to pass a bill to regulate the pill mills in Florida, and our governor at the time, Chris, signed that into law. And so he is now the head of an association of all the child serving agencies in Florida and all of the community-based care organizations that fund those agencies. And that is, where he spends the bulk of his time, similar to I spend the bulk of my time working on the opioid crisis. But then we come together on this project because we both see the value. And then Lisa Lorenzo is one of our newest members. She's a Republican from Miami, and she is someone who, when we were looking for who would have credibility as a Republican, because we really wanted to, I didn't want to do what probably would have been easy, which is find never Trump Republicans to join this effort and make it like a quietly really effort on the side of Democrats. I wanted to find people who loved their party, were seen as Republican by their party, and all that meant, and that I could bring that would give credibility to this, because I honestly believe that if we can't come together, Trump supporters, Biden supporters across the aisle, and if our leaders can't get along, then how can we expect anyone else? And so Lisa is she serves on a number of boards down in South Florida. She has been very engaged and also very engaged in philanthropic opportunities down there. She's not a Politico. She wasn't a state rep like Kurt and I, but she has been a wonderful rounding out of our project, and always reminds us to hey, if we're expecting people to do this hard work, we also need to tend to their spirit, to their mental health and well-being. We need to give them these soft skills that often go kind of under discussed because they're not, the sexy politics of it. This is just what makes that possible. The making sure that you are taking care of yourself in order to take care of this growing network.
Our guest is former State Representative Jennifer Webb, and we're speaking about her new group called the Sunshine State Unity Network. I'm Sean Canan. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. And Jennifer, I wanted to mention that you had talked earlier about that your group has candidate principles. So tell us about what some of these principles are that you recommend to candidates and what kind of response you're getting from candidates about kind of buying in.
Perfect. And these are intended to be kind of apple pie and mother's hugs kind of a things. We understand as former candidates ourselves that elections can get, a little messy, and that's fine. Like, bring your whole competitive spirit to the game. Like, what did Caitlin Clark say? Like, trash talking, why can't girls do it? Like, guys do it on the field. Like, whatever you need to do just before you get to demonizing your opponent. We don't want people to actually dehumanize their opponent or call for violence against their opponent. We want candidates who or have a honest engagement with the process, that believe in hosting a civil campaign, like I said, meaning encouraging peaceful election atmosphere during the pre-elections, polling, counting, all of that stuff. We want candidates who encourage secure voting, which means to us respect voters' freedom to exercise their lawful rights to register and vote free from interference, obstruction, or intimidation. We want candidates who speak to fair oversight of elections and encourage political parties and others to train poll watchers on the election process. And we want candidates who trust outcomes. Like, absolutely, if you make claims of election irregularities in accordance with laws and acknowledge the legitimacy of outcomes after the results have been certified and all contestations decided. So, like, use the court process. If you really think that there's some irregularities, like, explore that. But then at the end of the day, when they're in, hold them up as this is what is actually, this is the actual results. So and we've been getting very good response to these principles. And I do wish that my colleague Kurt could have been on with us today, because he's been specifically speaking to Republican county Republican parties, and the county officials are very excited that we're encouraging people to that we are reinstilling these principles into this election. And I think that that's a very good sign. We've been reaching out in the spirit of bipartisanship. We will announce elections where both candidates, once we're through the primary, where we have all candidates who've signed on to the principles, so that we can put forward those races, because it's really not about individual candidates as much as it is about elevating races in areas where our democracy is working well. And that's an indicator that democracy is working well.
And accepting the results of elections, not too long ago, that wouldn't have been very controversial at all. But now it kind of is one of the main sticking points of one of the major parties. So how do you anticipate getting around that potential stumbling block?
We're bringing in people who agree that President Biden was the winner of the election, and that understand, even if they supported Trump and President Trump in his reelection bid 4 years ago, that they understand that the election was not actually stolen, and in giving them a community so that they can prepare to speak with moral authority and with the facts that, again, this election wasn't stolen. And it's amazing how much work can be done behind the scenes of just encouraging people to put forward messaging, especially people in positions of power, that supports, that doesn't question the legitimacy of elections. And that's on both sides. I mean, we're talking this year, I think the concern is on the Republican side that I've heard spoken most frequently, but it could be on either side. I mean, depending on how the polling goes. However, 2 years ago in one of our counties that what had been a Democratic stronghold and had swung to Republicans picking up a lot of seats, I had to personally reach out to Democratic elected officials who were questioning results, saying, hey, this isn't helpful. Like, do you have specific information about this particular race that you're calling into question? If not, I would encourage you to take down that post or to back the results of the election for the sake of democracy. And it's amazing, when I first started this 3 years ago, elected officials thought that I was overstating their importance in either ginning up or helping to tamp down just the general public. But now they see it as part of their responsibility. And good ones really do respond, regardless of party. I mean, they'll say, okay, you're right. Or I'm like, just dial it back like 2 percentage points and you're not, and that's within the realm of of kind of what we want our democracy to look like in the US. And so more and more elected officials are stepping up to the challenge. Now, we're not in the heat of the general election yet. So, but we're building those relationships and have been for the past 2 years. And hopefully that will be helpful in pulling people in and making sure that that they're not putting out messages that undermine or that set a new norm. Because what I don't think people understand is even like just calling into question our election processes, which have been really sound, especially in Florida, for at least since the hanging Chad incident of the 2000s. When you call into questions and you do undermine people's faith and trust in the election process. And then you can actually reduce the faith that the general public has in election, which in turn reduces turnout, which in turn has consequences on who the parties even elect or put forward as candidates. And so it really does have a devolution of our democracy that we each can contribute to reversing.
And the Sunshine State Unity Network you mentioned just a moment ago, one of the things that it does is it has these webinars. So who's the audience for these webinars and how can people get involved and what kind of content do you have on these?
So I'm sure that you've heard, like we've all heard, you have your facts, I have mine. And what we seek to do in the Sunshine or the Sun 100 is to pull people together and to get, subject matter experts, national subject matter experts who are nonpartisan to present on things that are foundational to our democracy. So just 2 weeks ago, we had Dr. Susan McManus, distinguished professor emerita from USF and political analyst and pundit from lots of local affiliates of national television stations and news stations. She was on just explaining, like, here's what the polls say in Florida, and here's how you can be a savvy consumer of polling, and here's how you can talk about polling to others to encourage them to be savvy consumers. And because before that, we had someone from the Election Reformers Network come and talk about primaries and the role that primaries play in increasing partisanship and hyperpartisanship in the United States. We've had folks come on and talk about media literacy, where our network has actually been able to impact and provide their feedback on trainings in order to make this training even more cross-partisan and appealing no matter who you are, because it's intended for a broad audience and we want everyone to be savvy consumers of media. We've had how to take care of yourself and your network. Thank you, Miss Lisa Lorenzo, for inserting some of that in. And so it's a full, we seek to create something together, to learn something together, to discuss something together every quarter. And so it is intended for community leaders, people who are interested in their communities and giving back and talking to people across difference. It is intended for folks who want to help promote a positive norm and help combat the divisiveness in our country. And all you have to do is go onto our website and register for the upcoming webinar. The next webinar, we're breaking into the groups to talk in depth about actually those three topics that I just mentioned. So we'll be, dividing out, and it'll be a led conversation by a moderated conversation for participants to come together to decide how they want to integrate these lessons and this information and how they want to disseminate it.
And I should tell people that if you want to find out more about these webinars, I've put a link on our website, wmnf.org, a link to the webinar so you can kind of watch on YouTube. And before I let you go, Jennifer, I just want to ask you one other question. I noticed that your group, the Sunshine State Unity Network, has a Supervisor of Elections tour. What's that?
Oh, that is actually where we go county by county and help to bring people together across party, see exactly how the supervisors of election operate in any particular county. So if you're interested, reach out to me and we can arrange it. It was highly successful last election cycle in dispelling ideas of that our elections weren't safe. So you see the people counting the ballots, you see how they separate the envelopes from the voting, from the actual ballot itself. You see how they cure the process that they use to what they call cure the ballots. And you can ask all of your questions to the supervisors of election who join us in this process on these tours. My favorite from 2 years ago was Wesley Wilcox out in Marion County. He could even tell you it was exactly what American democracy is and should remain, which is neighbors putting together this event for the good of ourselves and our country. And so he could tell you, this box that transports these machines to one of our polling locations was fabricated by Mr. So-and-so, whose business has been there forever. And your first grade teacher at the local elementary school, she works at this polling location and she's worked there for X number of years. And it was beautiful. And it honestly did a great job of rolling back some of the cynics in the room and keeping them in and opening up their minds to maybe these national pundits who've come into Florida to disrupt our faith in our elections aren't right. And it was great. And so I absolutely will be posting those on our website and taking groups to the supervisor of election this summer.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on WMNF's Tuesday Cafe, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Thanks for joining us. Former State Representative Jennifer Webb's new group is called the Sunshine State Unity Network. It aims to reduce violence, bolster the republic, and restore faith in our democratic institutions in Florida. And you can find out much more on our website, WMNF.org. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. And if you'd like to join this conversation, you can give us a call at 813-239-9663 if you're listening live on July 2nd. We turn now to our next guest, who will break down yesterday's historic decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. It ruled for the first time that former presidents have broad immunity from prosecution that extends the delay in Donald Trump's trial in Washington on charges of election interference, and it all but rules out a trial before the November election. We'll get into all of that in a moment with our guests. So let me introduce now, to break down all of this, what it means, what happened yesterday, is Stetson University College of Law professor Chara Torres-Spelliscy. Welcome back to Tuesday Cafe, Chara.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad you could join us, and we're going to break down all the details, but let's start with the big picture. So what's important to know about yesterday's ruling?
So I have been writing about Trump's ongoing criminal liability in my new book, Corporatocracy. And I think all of the fears that I laid out in that book sort of came to pass with this presidential immunity decision from the Supreme Court. The court gives a new and broad immunity to core presidential powers. They didn't go as far as Trump wanted. So Trump wanted the entire case thrown out, and they didn't do that. But they helped him enormously. Number one, they helped him with the timing of all of this. Jack Smith had originally asked to expedite this case. He knew that this would end up in front of the Supreme Court, and he, sort of pleaded with them, can you please give me an expedited hearing on this? And the court refused. They said, go back to the lower courts, litigate it there, and then if it comes to us, it comes to us. So he does that. He wins with Judge Chutkan. He wins in the DC Circuit, who both come to the, I think, perfectly logical conclusion that ex-presidents are not categorically immune. It goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court hears it on the last day of hearings for this Supreme Court term. Then they sit on the decision until the last day for decisions to be issued in this Supreme Court term. And we finally got that decision yesterday. It is earth-shattering in terms of the powers that it gives all presidents, including President Biden. I said a lot, so let me pause there.
Yeah, I want to remind people that we're speaking with Stetson University College of Law professor Chara Torres-Spelisi on Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa, and we're talking about yesterday's historic decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. So one of the things that I guess the main thing it did is that it granted presidents absolute immunity for official acts as president. So let's specifically look at the Trump case here that we're talking about. What is former President Trump charged with, and how could this impact that trial and also the timing of that trial?
So he is charged with interfering with the 2020 election. There were many different octopus legs to that crime. So one of the things that he stands accused of doing is helping to orchestrate the fake electors attempt. So in many different states, there were dueling slates of electors, one that was legitimate and for Joe Biden. And then there were these fake electors who pretended that they were real electors, which is in itself is a federal crime, and now we are finding is a crime in several of the states because there are ongoing criminal prosecutions in multiple states over the fake elector scheme. So that was one aspect of all of this. He also tried to gut the DOJ and have the DOJ seize voting machines. There was a strange moment in there where he had tried to appoint Sidney Powell as some sort of voting czar to investigate the election. And this is all after courts had already rejected every plausible legal way of dealing with the results of the 2020 election. Like, he had his day in court. He just utterly failed because he didn't win that election. And then there are the January 6th problems. So on January 6th, he has this huge crowd that he has encouraged to come to DC through a series of tweets and other public statements. Then he gives an incendiary speech to that crowd. Some members of that crowd then break into the Capitol in a violent way that injures over 100 members of law enforcement. And then he sort of does nothing for hours to stop the violence of this crowd or their object. And one of their objects seemed to have been, if we're going to take their word for it, they were trying to hang Mike Pence. And the reason that they were trying to hang Mike Pence is there had been enormous pressure put on Pence by Trump and some of his lawyers to interfere with the lawful and constitutionally mandated count of electoral college votes on January 6th. And I have to give credit where credit is due. Mike Pence didn't do that. And so one of the sort of charges here is, the plot to essentially pressure the vice president into breaking the law and breaking the Constitution. So what the court does here is it sets up three new categories. So with core presidential powers, that gets absolute immunity. And I think what the court means by this is those powers that are specifically enumerated in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. That the president is the commander-in-chief, that he has the pardon power, that he gets to appoint ambassadors and judges. Those are all explicit powers that the Constitution gives to every president. Then there are implied powers that are more, the court talks about a sort of a twilight zone. This comes from an older case called Youngstown Steel, where in that case, it was President Truman. He seizes the steel mills in the middle of the Korean War. He thinks he has a good reason for doing this, where we have a need for steel in order to arm our troops. But the Supreme Court brushed back Truman in that decision, and they talked about where presidential power is at its sort of highest ebb and lowest ebb. And so the court reincorporates that the Truman model somewhat into this opinion and decides that those types of peripheral presidential powers are going to get presumptions of immunity, but those presumptions could be rebutted in a particular case. And the court in particular says that what happened between Trump and Vice President Pence might be in that sort of twilight zone where you could sort of pierce the immunity. And then finally, the court has this third new category, which is for unofficial acts. And unofficial acts get zero immunity from prosecution. And that may be outcome determinative for President Trump's future prosecution. Even Trump's own attorney at the Supreme Court said that many of the things that he is charged with, he did in his private capacity. And I hope that courts hold those lawyers to those representations at the Supreme Court, because they already admitted that a lot of what happened was in his private capacity, and that does not get immunity.
Our guest is Stetson University College of Law professor Chara Torres-Spelliscy, and we're talking about yesterday's U.S. Supreme Court ruling granting presidents absolute immunity for official acts. I'm Sean Canan. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. So whether or not these acts are official acts and whether or not the president has immunity or the former president, that all has to now be determined by a lower court. So how is all that going to work? And how does the evidence that's presented, how is that impacted by whether these are official or unofficial acts?
Okay, so the court gives Judge Chutkan a huge homework assignment here. They don't articulate every single time when something is going to be official or not official. That is going to be left to trial courts in future cases, including this one. And so she's going to have to entertain arguments. And I think the arguments are going to be starkly different from each side. So Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, is going to argue that everything that he's charged is a private act. And Trump's attorneys are going to counter that none of it is a private act, that it was all under his official capacity as president. And it'll be up to the trial judge to figure that out. I mean, on the upside, the court clarifies that campaigning for a president is an unofficial act. That's a private act. And much of the behavior around the 2020 election and trying to overthrow it was really Trump acting as a candidate, not as a president. And one of the reasons we know that is the running of presidential elections, so administering a presidential election, is given constitutionally to the states and to Congress, and then for like 5 seconds to the vice president. So it's the states that run presidential elections. Then, when that is done, it is Congress that counts those electoral college votes. And the vice president on January 6th is the one who essentially opens the envelopes and helps with the count in Congress in his capacity as the president of the Senate. But the president, you might notice in that list, is nowhere to be found. The president is merely a candidate, and that is in his private capacity. So I sort of fully expect that the way that this will eventually play out is that Judge Chutkan will decide that this was all campaigning, and as such, it is not an official act and is not immunized. So while I think Trump has already done a little victory lap about this decision, it may actually not save him.
What about, can these courts, the lower court, can it consider Trump's motives when it's weighing the evidence here?
So here is where there was a split even among the conservative justices. So most of this opinion is 6-3, as in all of the conservatives vote to expand immunity, and all of the liberal justices are to have their dissents angrily saying that you have changed the nature of the presidency and you've gone too far. But where there is some difference of opinion is on this question of evidence. So Judge Barrett joins with the liberal justices on this question of evidence. So the majority holds that you cannot bring in evidence from a president's core official acts. Those are all official, so they are completely and absolutely immune. And you cannot even bring in evidence from those official acts that might illuminate what they're doing with their private acts. And for Justice Barrett, this was a bridge too far. And I completely agree with her and the justices in dissent that it is going to be very, very strange to try to explain to a jury what a particular president is accused of even doing if you have to redact out some of what he does in his official capacity, because in some instances, it's going to be incredibly intertwined. And it may make the narrative seem to make no sense. But here, you're not allowed to take in questions of motive if, in order to do so, you have to expose an investigation into core presidential duties. I mean, this is all like a mouthful, and this is going to be a lawyer's delight. Like, this is going to cause lots and lots of filings in the Trump cases. And I'd imagine if we have a future president who is really close or beyond the criminal line, they're going to, hug this opinion and like put it under their pillow so they can sleep better at night. It is really, really bad.
So we've talked about this decision kind of closing the door to judicial review of official conduct of the president. But what about, can Congress regulate the president's actions here?
No, one of the ways that this decision was really extreme is it didn't just close courthouse doors to questions around the criminality of presidents when they are exercising their core powers. It also made clear that Congress can't legislate in this area either. I mean, in some ways, this is it's similar to how Congress has always sort of stayed away from certain presidential powers. So, for example, the pardon power has always been thought of as nearly plenary. But in the last couple of years, we've had to have these weird discussions about the possibility of a corrupt pardon or a self-pardon. Now, no president has been so bold as to pardon themselves. The biggest pardon in U.S. history was President Ford pardoning Richard Nixon after Watergate. But that was, one president pardoning the ex-president. We've never had anyone try to do a self-pardon. And the other thing that, fortunately, I think we've never really seen is someone just outright paying for a pardon, like just bribing a president for a pardon. And I think what this decision opens the door to are both of those horrifying possibilities, because it basically says that with core presidential duties, and pardoning power is a core presidential duty, you can find it right in the Constitution, that those types of actions by the president cannot be reviewed. They can't be reviewed by the court, and you can't have a congressional law that says, no corrupt pardons. So this is just the magnitude of this change, I think, is going to take us years to fully appreciate.
Let's talk a little bit about what Justice Sotomayor wrote in her dissent. One of the things she said is the president is now a king above the law. Is she exaggerating?
So they didn't quite go as far as Trump wanted. But Trump had sort of tried this in several different cases. So when he was a sitting president, and Cy Vance in the in New York, he had the job before Alvin Bragg. So the DA for Manhattan was already sort of sniffing around Trump's various potential crimes, and Cy Vance ran into this Trump argument that you like Nana and the Boo Boo, you can't catch me, I'm the president. And that was litigated at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually said in the Vance case that the law is entitled to all men's evidence. And they said, go ahead, investigate even a sitting president. If you have, probable cause to think that there's a crime here, go ahead. Now, what Cy Vance was looking at was actions by Trump and the Trump Organization before Trump was president. And that may be a key difference. And in order to make these two decisions, the one we got yesterday and Vance makes sense, I think that's one way you could reconcile them. So Trump made the position in that case that he was completely immune, and the Supreme Court said, no, you're not completely immune from criminal subpoenas. And in another case called Mazars, that was a fight between Trump and Congress, where Congress was trying to get some information from Trump, and Trump did his old, Nana boo boo, I'm the president, you can't get me. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's not right either. But they put new hoops that Congress had to jump through before they could get information from a sitting president. And with Trump versus the United States, they've immunized some actions by the president if they are sort of explicitly in the Constitution. But with the unofficial acts, they are not immunized. So I think this is just going to lead to so much litigation, I think, in the future. And it's going to slow down the January 6th criminal trial for Trump. And if all he was trying to established with all of this was delay, then he succeeded in that front, because it seems very unlikely that we will get a criminal trial in this case before the 2024 election.
Our guest is Stetson University College of Law professor Chara Torres-Spelliscy, and we're talking about yesterday's historic U.S. Supreme Court ruling that grants presidents absolute immunity for official acts. I'm Sean Canan. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. And one of the other things that Justice Sotomayor wrote in her defense is she said that the Supreme Court had created a law-free zone around the president, and that she warned of the dangers of criminal presidents from here on. Any thoughts about the possibility of those things?
Yeah, I'm just in the middle of writing a piece about what it would look like if we take this new authority that's been given by Trump versus the United States, yesterday's decision from the Supreme Court, and we applied it to the Nixon facts. So because I'm a campaign finance professor, I have spent a lot of quality time looking at Watergate, because modern federal campaign finance law was inspired by the crimes in Watergate. So one of the crimes that happened during Watergate was Nixon is trying to raise money for his reelection in 1972. And he breaks all sorts of laws doing this. And the two main ways that he breaks the law is he asks for money from corporations who are barred from giving to federal candidates under a law called the Tillman Act, which is from 1907. And then the other huge way that he broke the law in raising money for the Nixon reelection campaign, otherwise known as the Committee to Reelect the President, which has the awesome acronym CREEP. So the other way he made money for CREEP was by selling ambassadorships. And so one of the things that Nixon's lawyer, Herb Kalmbach, is convicted for in the Watergate scandal is for selling ambassadorships. Now, selling an ambassadorship doesn't work unless you have a president who's also in on the deal, who will actually appoint the donor to be an ambassador, which is exactly what he did. But under this opinion, appointing ambassadors is a core presidential power. It's right there in the Constitution. And the court just immunized that behavior. So you could not get Nixon for being in on the scam to sell ambassadorships under this opinion. And that's pretty horrifying. And even Amy Coney Barrett, in her concurrence, said, how are we ever going to be able to prosecute bribery against the sitting president if you can't bring in their official acts? If, the bribery statute basically says that it's giving money for a official act. Well, if you can't bring in the official act evidence, does this just mean that whoever is in the presidency is, now free to take bribes? I mean, the whole thing is pretty horrifying.
And before we move on to Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent, I want to read one last thing from Sotomayor that may have stuck out even the most. And it said that, or what if the president orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? And she answers, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for pardon, which we've kind of already talked about. Immune is what Justice Sotomayor is saying. So obviously, I'm not hoping that anything like this happens, but the sitting president could order the assassination as an official act of his political rival, and at least according to yesterday's decision by the Supreme Court, that's not reviewable at all.
Yeah, I mean, this would be the president using his commander-in-chief power. I mean, the breadth of this is just astonishingly bad. And what I think this now leaves us with as the last two safeguards are the impeachment power. But as we've seen in recent years, Clinton was impeached, Trump was impeached twice. Neither of them were removed from office. So I think the potency of that power is always hinged on, do you have 1/3 of the Senate that sticks with you? And if you do, then you get to remain in power no matter how many horrible things you have done while you're president, which is not great. And so ultimately, this is in the hands of voters. If voters don't want, a convicted felon in the White House, they shouldn't vote for a convicted felon.
And Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson, also dissented and said similar things to what Sotomayor was saying, that the Supreme Court is incentivizing crimes by president, that the Supreme Court has usurped Congress's role, and that this could excuse murders or coups. So, we're just getting kind of I'm trying to maybe summarize some of what she said, because some of it is what Sotomayor was saying as well. But maybe I should ask you then, this SCOTUS ruling, could it impact the other Trump cases as well? Since could they be considered to be official acts, and maybe even the conviction that he's already had, could some of that get wiped out?
So let's take them one trial at a time. So we just had a conviction in the New York case for falsifying business records, which is a violation of New York state law. There could be a few of the counts. So he was found guilty unanimously on all 34 counts by that jury in New York. A few of those counts could be bounced under this decision because, if you'll remember, some of the payments that Trump made to Michael Cohen, which is sort of the source of all of this, were made while he was a sitting president. And so there's at least a plausible argument that a few of these counts are now immunized under this ridiculous new decision. So I doubt that he would be able to throw out all 34 counts, but a few might go away. And we'll see. I mean, Trump has already said that he plans to appeal the entire conviction. So we'll see what the lower courts in New York feel like doing. So in Georgia, that is going to have very similar fact patterns as the one in DC. So these are charges that arise out of the attempt to overthrow the 2020 election. And but on the other hand, I think both the January 6th case in DC, as well as the January 6th case out of Georgia, this is really Trump as a campaigner. It's not Trump as president. It might get a little weird with the call that Trump made to Georgia officials, basically demanding that they manufacture new votes for him and just enough votes for him to win the state of Georgia. I don't think that should be deemed an official act, because it seems pretty clear that that is him acting in his capacity as a candidate, trying to suck up votes that don't exist, like a Hoover vacuum cleaner. But that, I think, is going to be something that is litigated and is going to take time. And then finally, there's the Mar-a-Lago case. So with the Mar-a-Lago case, you have the accusation that Trump, as he's leaving the White House, absconds with sensitive classified documents. And then the crime is that he won't give them back. Like, NARA, who has authority over these documents, asks and asks and asks, and he gives back some, but not all of them. The FBI eventually has to go in and search Mar-a-Lago to find the remaining documents, and what they find are things with classified markings. And as an ex-president, he had no right to those. Those belong to the archive. And so with that case, there may be some strange thing that drops out because he takes them while he is president. And while he is president, he's allowed to have these documents. But since the gravamen of that case is that he retained them when he was an ex-president, I don't think that changes because of the Trump versus U.S. case.
I want to thank you very much for coming on Tuesday Cafe today, Chara.
Thank you so much.
Chara Torres-Spellacy is professor of law at Stetson University College of Law in Gulfport. This has been Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. Tomorrow is Midpoint, and coming up next is Wavemakers with Janet and Tom. They're going to talk about the importance and resiliency of independent, locally owned bookstores with local owners and authors. This is WMNF Tampa.